Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. Now, before we go on to the restoration, I just want to give a shout out to Jack and Stephen Darby, who two of my subscribers who I met at Great Electric Train Show. It was great to meet you guys and speak to you, so thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. In this episode, I'm going to be looking at this Hornby Merchant Navy that I picked up from the local model shop, and it's in a bit of a state. It's been stripped down by somebody because the drive axle gear was loose or split, and it's been left in this state for quite some time. There's a wheel there. All the crank pins and screws are in the bottom of this box, along with the spring and a couple of spacers, but there are several little parts missing. The tender's not in too bad condition, although the steps are broken. So I'm going to have a look and see if we can restore this Merchant Navy to running order. Now, I do like Merchant Navy class. Anything like that, it looks a nice and powerful looking engine. Yeah, the tender's not in too bad a condition. It needs a clean up, but it's the loco part that's really going to cause us some issues, and as you can see, it's pretty bad. So I'm going to remove the body shell by removing the screw under the smoke box, and then it unclips from the firebox end. And to my surprise, the model is DCC fitted. I didn't know that at the time when I bought it, although it is fitted with a Hornby chip, and I'm not keen on them if I'm honest. But everything is all mangled. I didn't realise when I took the body off that it's actually got a speedo drive. So using my hex nut driver to remove the crank pin, luckily I didn't break it, but I didn't check, so it was my fault. But that releases the chassis and the body shell. The body shell for the loco isn't in too bad a condition. There's a couple of details missing. The injector pipe work from under one of the cabs is all broken off. The whistle's missing, although I later find the whistle in that box. But there's a couple of things that could be done with it. I'm going to try later to scratch build some injector pipe work, see if we can replace this missing detail. The actual mounting bracket is bent inwards as well, so I'm going to have to straighten all that out. This I'm going to try and make it out of this fuse wire. I'm going to give it a go, see how it goes. But we'll have a look at that later on. But other than that, the body shells are not in too bad a condition. So I'm going to start by more disassembly. I'm going to remove the front pony wheels, or the front bogie wheels, because all this will need cleaning up. So I remove that, set that aside for cleaning later. This base plate is broken. There's a missing part on the base plate, the bit with the brake shoes on and that. So I'm going to have to source a replacement part because that bit wasn't in the crate where this model was dumped. So I'm going to turn the model back over, or the chassis back over onto its bottom, and we're going to remove the gearbox cover. I'm going to check to make sure the idler gear isn't split. So removing that screw and that pickup wire. There's the worm gear for the motor. The lubrication is starting to congeal, it's a little bit sticky, so we're going to have to clear all that off. And the motor mount at the rear is held in place with a screw that's underneath the chassis, so just undoing that screw will remove the motor mount, and then I can remove the motor, just like that. And there's the idler gear, and luckily enough there's no splits or anything on that, so that's in good condition and can be reused. So it looks like it was just the gear on the axle that was initially causing this model to be disassembled and potentially scrapped. I think they'd have stripped this for parts had I not come along and bought it. So looking at the gear on the axle, now the gear on the axle isn't actually split, it is complete. What has happened is the serrations on the axle have actually worn away the plastic, so the hole on the gear now is too big for the axle, just marginally. And I've seen this before on a Hornby loco like this, and I repaired it by actually aralditing or two-part epoxy resin the gear back on, and that model is still going strong. So I'm going to have a look at repairing this in a similar way. The rest of the chassis is quite mangled, but I've managed to get this replacement part. This is a new base plate for a Hornby Merchant Navy, and interestingly, this is wired up with two wires. The original relied on that stupid friction pickup which pushes onto a nodule, but this is actually wired, so it'll give better performance. I'm not sure if it's the wrong part that I ordered, but it fits, and having those pickups wired will help because trying to get the original pickups to align with the little nub on the die cast to make contact is a nightmare, and it's not a design I agree with. So this one should be a lot better. So the other one will be consigned to the spares bin, and I will indeed fit this part. Now again, like I said, as you'll see in a minute, I'm not sure if this is for a newer Merchant Navy, but the screws supplied in this were too small for the actual holes in this original chassis. So I'm going to clean everything up now. I've got a cotton bud, and because of the amount of old grease and oil on these axles, I've got it soaked in contact cleaner. And I'm going to clean all the wheels and the axles and the bearings all thoroughly. I won't bore you with footage of me cleaning the wheels, but I clean everything up. All the drive wheels, pony wheels, and the front bogie wheels and the tender wheels are all cleaned using a cotton bud and contact cleaner. And now I'm just having a look again at this axle and this gear. Now I do believe this is repairable. Like I said, I've repaired one of these before with a very tiny amount of 2-part epoxy resin. And this Gorilla Glue stuff is featured on the channel a lot just lately actually. But it is good stuff, and I believe I can repair this again as I did before. But it's worth a try. The hardest thing will get the quartering right, because when you quarter wheels by eye, you rely on looking through the spokes, but I can't do that on these wheels. Now this is actually the next day, and I've glued that gear in place, and as you can see there, it is solid. I can't move it. So I put the bearing back on, and getting one of the wheels, I'm just getting, that is the trailing wheel with the speedometer drive crank on it, and I'm just going to quarter the wheels correctly, basing it off this. So with the front wheel down at 6 o'clock, the rear one at 9 o'clock, doing it by eye, and push the wheels together. Now with Hornby bullied wheels, they are serrated on the axles, you can't just pull them off. They have to go on square, otherwise you're going to ruin them. So once I've quartered the middle wheel, I put all 3 axles back in the chassis, and as you can see, I've removed the cylinders, wires and everything just for ease and cleaning, and I've put the side rods back on. Now if this quartering is correct, this should run freely, and there we go, no binding, it is entirely free running, which means I've got the quartering on that middle wheel correct, which is a good thing. So now we can start rebuilding this Merchant Navy and hopefully return it to service. But you can see there it's extremely free rolling. I'm going to take the idler gear out, and that is even more free rolling without the friction of the idler gear. So now that the wheels are in place, I'm going to fit this new base plate, and the wires go through the hole at the front of the model. They pass through up to where the PCB and DCC decoder socket is. And once this is in place, I add a small amount of oil to the bearings and axles, because we removed all of the old lubrication when we cleaned the model earlier. So the wires thread through, and then as I said, we're going to lubricate these axles up. Just a small amount of oil on each bearing, just so that when the model's running it's properly lubricated. And this Fleischmann pin dropper makes easy work of applying that oil. And then, as usual, a small amount of Labelle 106 grease on the actual gears. Just a small bit on there, and that'll work its way through the drivetrain when we put this back together. So the base plate is on, the wires are threaded through. I'm just going to get my pliers to pull those wires through the die-cast chassis there. And then the base plate can go on, and make sure that all 6 pickups are in line with the drive wheels, because all 6 driving wheels on this model pick up power. The base plate clips in at the rear, and then is held in place with the top plate with the brake detail on, and then 3 screws. So I'm just checking there to make sure all the pickups are in line, and they are, so that's good. This one here needs slight adjustment, so I'll just do that. And then this is the top plate, that goes on, and that just clips down, making sure that the brake detail is not fouling the side rods, because sometimes they can be slightly bent out of shape. But this one's brand new, so it's okay. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I go to fit the 3 retaining screws that came with the new base plate, and these are all too thin. You'll see I put one in thinking it's it's gone in, because I don't tighten them right up to start with. But then when I put the middle one in, it actually pops out. So there's actually no resistance whatsoever. So I go through my spare screws. I've got a big tub of screws. Find 3 that fit, and have fitted those to hold the base plate in place. I'm just checking that it's still free running, which it is, and there's the 2 pickup wires. So this is the motion and the piston rods. This part can go back on. Put the cylinders back on. These piston rods and the motion clips into holes in the cylinders. So I'm going to put that back on the model as one unit, making sure I don't bend anything. There is a loose part on that motion bracket, so I'm going to glue that into place in a minute when it's fitted back on the model. But other than that, this is in quite good condition, considering that this model was dumped in a crate full of other models. It's surprising that I managed to recover as many parts to this as I did. But anyway, I thread the pickup wires through the motion assembly and make sure that everything's in order. Pull the piston rods down so they're out of the way, and then the cylinders motion assembly sit on the chassis like so. The cylinders are held in place with a rather large silver screw, so I replaced that. I took them off earlier just for ease really of cleaning, and it saves any danger to bending the rods. The DCC anchor or socket support is then put back in place, and the screw that goes through that also holds the back of the motion in place. So make sure that's all done correctly, and the pickup wires come out the front there quite nice. So now it's time to rebuild the side rods. So I'm going to remove this centre crank pin that I put on when we tested the wheels and the quarter end. The spacer piece is already on, so that doesn't need any sort of replacing. There's a spacer piece between the side rods and the piston rod. Piston rod goes on, and then the linkages, when they're freed up, will sit on the centre crank pin. The centre crank pin, on the top of the crank pin is a rectangular nodule, and the motion sits on there. It's got a rectangular cutout. Just make sure that it just ensures that when you put it together it's all fitted right. And then the centre crank pin is replaced, and then all of the crank pins on this side are tightened up with the hex driver. I've said before, but my hex drivers come from Expo Tools. I get a lot of questions asking where I get them from, and I get mine from Expo Tools. They come in a pack of three different sizes. So I did the same on the other side. Took the crank pin out. The spacer was already on there, so the piston rod motion was done. And then this was one of the crank pins that was missing. So in a tub I've got actually labelled as side rod screws. I don't know why I've called them that and not crank pins. But I looked through this because this was one of the, like I said, one of the things that was missing that I couldn't find in the crate. And judging how tiny they are, it's not surprising it went missing. But I do have a spare. I have a spare that fits, so that fits in there, and this was tightened up. So another reason why I never throw anything away, because I've hopefully always got some spares I can call upon. So that's the side rods and motion all rebuilt complete. And another test to make sure nothing is catching, and nothing is catching. It's all running nice and smooth. So I'm overjoyed that I got the quarter in right again on them wheels. And as you can see, the wheels are all nice and shiny because I've already cleaned them up. Now I'm going to use that insulation tape to hold the chassis upside down, because the chassis is in an odd shape and it won't sit right. And that broken little rivet in there that holds the motion in place, I'm going to just put a small blob of 2-part epoxy resin on that, very tiny amount, just to hold it in place, because it's a plastic rivet and it's the heads come off it, so it won't actually secure it in place anymore. So now we're cracking. We can put the idler gear back in, and once the idler gear's in, I add a small drop of Lebel 106 on both of the gears on the idler gear, and I also put a small amount of oil on it as well, because this has a metal axle of its own that spins in the chassis, so it needs lubrication. Being metal on metal, there's plenty of this grease in this tube. It just takes a bit to get out when it runs low. But there we go, the Lebel's on, and like I said, a little bit of this oil, this modelling oil, on the gear and on the spindles, or the gear axle that spins around. Then we can start by putting the motor back in place. Easy to determine which way is the right way because there's a black tack mark on it from where it was put on the chassis in the factory. Gearbox cover then goes on. Although for some reason I don't screw this down at the moment, I then put the rear motor mount back on. Now when you screw the gearbox cover down, it used to have this brass tab on it for pickups, but I no longer need that, so I'm going to cut that off and solder the wires. So the rear motor mount was put back on and secured underneath with the screw that goes through the bottom of the chassis. When I can get it lined up correctly, that is. And then this screw here is tightened up. And then I put the screw back in the top of the gearbox cover. I don't know why I didn't screw it on in the first place. But as I said, that should have had the brass pickup wire on it. But at this time, because I've changed that base plate, I don't need to put it on. So that's that all secured. And this whole nest of wiring here. The next thing to do is to secure the DCC socket back onto its anchor point. And there are two small chamfered screws that go on there. The wiring does look a bit of a mess, so I'm going to tidy that up in a moment when everything is in place. So once that's screwed down, I put the spring back in that goes in the chassis, followed by the rear pony truck, making sure it's the correct way round. And then this itself is secured with this long thin screw. And watching this video back doing the voiceover, it does amaze me just how many parts I managed to recover from this crate. The only bits missing were the base plate and one crank pin. That's it. That is incredible. If you could have seen where this model was dumped, it was definitely destined for the scrap bin. But I like bullied, so it was worth rescuing. So now that's in place, I put a blanking plate into the socket for now to test. I'm going to solder these wires up. And just testing it on the tender drawbar with power. The motor spins, everything is running as it should. There's no sticky parts. So that's really good. We've rebuilt the chassis into a working unit now. And now I can get the wires all soldered together. Black to black and red to red. It's pretty self-explanatory on this model. I'm going to tidy the wires up, shorten them, solder them, tidy them up, add some heat shrink. And what was 15-20 minutes work on camera, off camera, was done instantly for you guys. So there we go. Wiring's all connected, all soldered up and tidied. So now this chassis should run on its own accord. The pickups on the wheel should work, and applying battery power, and the chassis is indeed a nice runner. So that's really good. This Merchant Navy is on the way to being fit for duty again. So before I fit the body shell, I'm going to dust it over with a paintbrush to remove any dust. I've refit the Hornby decoder, and then there are two cutouts in the back of the body shell under the firebox where the two die-cast pins go in. Manipulate the DCC decoder in there, and then the body shell is secured with a screw at the front under the smoke box. Now I've got to resecure the speedometer drive because it's there and it's not broken, so I might as well use it. It is a fiddly part and they are easily broken, but I think when they're actually working, I think they look quite nice. If they're there, I will use them. It's a pity Hornby don't sell these as spares to replace ones that break off. So I'm just tightening up that last crank pin there on the speedo wheel. There we go. Now one of the last things to do is to refit the front bogie. It's easier to leave this off while reassembling the model because it gives you good access to that securing screw at the front of the model. And as you can see there, I've cleaned all this up again with a cotton bud and contact cleaner. That brass spacer washer is on there, and then I put the screw back in and tighten everything up. And that is this Merchant Navy, mechanically and electrically at least, rebuilt and back into working order. So yeah, just give it a dust off And then I also dust around the tender. I have cleaned the tender wheels off camera. Gets a bit tedious watching people clean wheels all the time. So I did that off camera, and the tender, apart from the steps up the side, the tender's in good condition. But I do replace the steps. You'll see in the running session that I do replace them. They're not exact Hornby spares. I use some plastic ladder, but they look good. And I'm just testing the model with a battery now. It runs forward okay, but as is normal with Hornby decoders, it's jolty running in one direction. Now that is normal. That's not the model, but it's running lovely forwards, and I'm pleased we've managed to rebuild this. So taking some pictures of my port line model, I want to rebuild the injectors, and this is what I did with the fuse wires, just a representation. I'd rather have something there than not. And once it was painted in a brass colour, it didn't look too bad. But since filming, I've actually found a website, this one here, RT Models, that sells a plethora of Merchant Navy detailing parts, including the injectors and pipework. So I'm going to order some of those up and replace my scratch-built ones with those. And there we go. That is United States lines taken from what is the model equivalent of Barry scrapyard condition, thoroughly rebuilt, a couple of parts replaced, and it's now looking like a lovely, powerful, stunning model, which these are in real life. I do like bullied Pacifics, especially in the rebuilt form. And considering Hornby's tooling is now getting on for the best part of 25 years old, these models, in my opinion, do look the part, and they still run well. They look good. It's just a pity that some of the spare parts for these now are starting to become hard to find. But this one at least has now been returned back to running order. If you've got an engine or anything you'd like to see repaired, DC fitted, or you want to make a donation, please contact me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. Have a look and get it sent over, and who knows, it may even feature in an episode all of its own. So I'll leave you now with some shots of United States lines running in the garden with a rake of 6 Pullmans. I deliberately put it on this train because these Pullman coaches are quite heavy, so this will prove whether or not that glue will hold on that centre gear, and I think you'll agree that it does. And I will continue to test this model, and I will report back in a couple of episodes' time as to whether or not the glue's held. But at the moment, it looks absolutely lovely running in the garden on this rake. So thanks again for watching Trash to Track. Again, a shout out to Jack and Stephen Darby. Thanks for chatting to me at Great Electric Train Show. And I'll catch you all in the next video. Bye for now. You want that on?
Well, I think so. Something down the table, didn't it?
What, in the coaches? They're lamps. Back on the bench after that running session, and I bet you thought I'd forgot, Dad, didn't you? I didn't. I put them in but left it till the end just to see if you watched the entire video. And there's your driver and fireman in there, so no need to worry about that.